I didn't hear the scream. That is the first thing you need to understand. The woods don't just hide things, they swallow them. Sound doesn't travel in a straight line out here, among the pines and the wet earth. It gets absorbed by the moss, broken by the tree trunks, and carried away by the wind coming off the mountain. So when Arthur died, the world was silent. I found him at 7 in the morning. My routine never changes. Coffee, black, strong enough to strip paint, boots, lace tight, and then the perimeter walk. When you live 3 miles from the nearest paved road, you learn to check your boundaries, not because you expect visitors, but because you want to make sure the world is staying away. Arthur lived in the A-frame cabin, about 400 yards through the brush, down in the dip of the valley. We were neighbors in the way 2 drowning men share an ocean. We waved. We nodded. Sometimes, if the weather was particularly brutal, one of us would check the other's chimney smoke just to make sure we hadn't frozen to death. But we didn't talk. I didn't ask about his life, and he had the decency not to ask about mine. He didn't ask why a man of 45, with good health and a pension, would lock himself away in a cabin that smelled of cedar and regret. I saw the color first. Arthur always wore drab colors. Olive greens, browns, grays. He liked to blend in. He was a birdwatcher, or so I assumed from the binoculars, always strapped to his chest. But that morning, I saw a flash of blue. It was his windbreaker. He was lying at the bottom of the ravine, a steep drop-off where the limestone cracks open like a broken tooth. He was face down in the creek bed. The water was shallow, barely covering his ears, but the angle of his neck told me everything I needed to know before I even slid down the muddy embankment. I checked for a pulse anyway. It's a reflex. Old habits die harder than people do. His skin was cold, clammy, the texture of raw dough. He had been dead for hours, likely since dusk the previous day. I stood up and wiped my hands on my jeans. I looked up at the ridge he had fallen from. It was a 30-foot drop, a bad step, a slip on the wet limestone, a tumble, a snap. That's what it looked like. That's exactly what it was supposed to look like. I climbed back up. It took me 10 minutes to find a spot with enough signal to call the sheriff. Then I waited. Sheriff Miller arrived 2 hours later. He's a young man, barely 30, with a softness around the jaw that suggests he's never had to clench his teeth in genuine fear. He treats me with a mix of reverence and pity. He knows who I was. He knows I was a detective sergeant in the city. He knows about the North Street siege. Everyone knows. That's why I'm here. Miller looked down at the body, then up at the ridge. He sighed. The sound of a man who just wanted his shift to end. "Damn shame," Miller said, scratching his neck. "Slipped, you reckon?" "It rained pretty hard last night. Those rocks get slick as oil." "It rained at 3 in the morning, I said. My voice sounded rusty. I hadn't used it in days. Arthur was dead before the rain started. Look at his clothes. The back of his jacket is soaked, but the ground underneath him is dry where the body shielded it. He fell before the storm." Miller squinted at me. "Okay. So he slipped before the rain. Still a slip. Elias. Guy is out hiking, misses a step. It happens. You know that better than anyone. Accidents happen." I flinched. He didn't mean it as a jab, but it landed like one. Accidents happen. That's what the review board said about the girl. Collateral damage. A tragic accident in the line of duty. "He wasn't a hiker," I said, keeping my voice flat. "He had bad knees. Arthritis. I've seen him walk to his mailbox. He winces on the flat gravel. Why would he be climbing the steepest ridge on the property line at dusk?" Miller shrugged, writing something in his notebook. "Maybe he saw a rare bird. Birdwatchers go crazy for that stuff. Look, Elias, I appreciate you calling it in. I really do. But don't turn this into something it isn't. The coroner will confirm it. But this is a fall. Plain and simple." They hauled Arthur up in a basket. It was clumsy work. They trampled the mud, broke the branches, erased the story the ground was trying to tell. I watched them from the tree line. When they were gone and the woods returned to silence, I went back to the ridge. I didn't go home. I stood exactly where Arthur must have fallen. Miller was right about the rocks being slick, but he was wrong about the slip. I crouched down. The moss here was thick. If you slip, your heel digs in. You leave a gouge, a frantic scrape mark as gravity takes you. There were no scrapes, but there was something else. About 5 feet back from the edge, in the soft loam between the pine roots, there was a depression. Not a footprint, a knee print, deep. Someone had knelt here, and next to it, the faint, geometric impression of a boot toe. Arthur didn't slip. He was pushed, and whoever pushed him had waited here, kneeling, watching, until the moment was perfect. I felt that familiar cold sensation in my stomach, the sensation I hadn't felt in 3 years, the hunter's instinct. It wasn't welcome. It was a disease I thought I had cured. I turned away and walked back to my cabin. I told myself to leave it alone. I told myself it wasn't my job. I told myself I was retired, broken, done. But the silence in the woods felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence was too loud. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. I sat in my armchair, the leather worn smooth by years of insomnia, and stared at the fire. I kept seeing the girl, Sarah, 12 years old. She was wearing a pink backpack. We breached the door because I thought I had a clean line of sight. I thought I had control. I was arrogant. I was the great detective Elias Thorne, the man who never missed. I gave the order. The flashbang went in, chaos followed, and when the smoke cleared, the bad guy was down, but Sarah was down too. A stray bullet. Not mine, but it didn't matter. It was my order, my timeline, my fault. I came to the woods to escape the ghosts, but ghosts don't respect geography. By 2 a.m., the whiskey bottle was lighter, but my head wasn't. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out toward the valley, toward Arthur's cabin. It should have been dark, a black void against the stars. But there was a light. It was faint, a tiny pinprick of yellow dancing through the trees, a flashlight beam, moving inside Arthur's cabin. Sheriff Miller had taped off the door with a single strip of yellow plastic, more of a formality than a barrier. He had taken the keys, presumably to hand over to next of kin, if there were any. So who was inside? Reason dictated I call Miller. He was the law. I was just a civilian with a trauma disorder. But Miller thought Arthur slipped. Miller wouldn't rush out here for a lights report. He'd come in the morning, and by then, whatever was happening would be over. I didn't make a conscious decision. My body just took over. It remembered the drill even if my mind wanted to forget. Dark clothes, boots, flashlight, kept off. I didn't take a gun. I locked my service weapon in a safe the day I moved here and threw away the combination. I took a heavy iron poker from the fireplace instead. A crude tool, but it had weight. I moved through the woods. I know this terrain. I know where the roots bulge and where the dry leaves accumulate. I moved silently. The air was crisp, smelling of wet pine needles and decay. I reached the perimeter of Arthur's clearing. The light inside the A-frame had vanished. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. The wind rustled the high branches. Then, the front door opened. A figure stepped out. Tall, slender, hooded. They paused on the porch, scanning the darkness. They held something under their arm, a rectangular shape. A box? A laptop? They moved quickly, not toward the main road, but toward the hiking trail that leads east, deeper into the forest, toward the old logging roads. I should have shouted. I should have confronted them. But hesitation, my new constant companion, seized me. What if I was wrong? What if this was a relative? What if I escalated a situation and someone else got hurt? The hesitation cost me the element of surprise. The figure melted into the trees. I walked to Arthur's cabin. The yellow tape was cut cleanly. The door was unlocked. I went inside. I didn't turn on the lights. I used my small tactical light, cupping the lens to minimize the spill. The place was neat. Too neat. Arthur was a messy eater. I had seen him on his porch wiping crumbs off his shirt. But the kitchen was spotless. The living room was arranged with military precision. I moved to the study. This is where he spent his time. There was a desk facing the window, a spotting scope on a tripod, stacks of notebooks. I opened one of the notebooks, Bird Log, 2024. I flipped through it. October 12th, asterisk. Red-tailed hawk, male, circling the North Ridge, asterisk. October 14th, asterisk. Blue jay, aggressive behavior, asterisk. It seemed normal, boring, even. I felt foolish. Maybe the intruder was just a looter, taking a TV or a computer. I kept flipping. The entries were consistent. Date, species, behavior. Then I noticed the pattern. Every third entry didn't make sense. Asterisk. November 2nd. Northern Cardinal. Plate 459 KRT. Nesting. Near the intersection. Asterisk. Birds don't have license plates. I flipped back. Asterisk. October 20th. Sparrow. 10. A.M. Meeting. Silver. Sedan. 2 males. Asterisk. Asterisk. October 25th. Crow. Exchange confirmed. Blue bag. Asterisk. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Arthur wasn't watching birds. He was watching the old logging road that intersected the highway 5 miles east. He was using the optics to conduct surveillance. I looked at the shelf where the intruder had likely taken something. There was a dust rectangle, the size of a laptop. But they missed something. Under the desk, taped to the underside of the drawer, a classic, almost cliché hiding spot was a small key. Not a house key. A locker key? A safety deposit box key? It was small, silver, and stamped with a number. 004. I peeled the tape off and put the key in my pocket. I looked around the room. Who were you, Arthur? I saw a photo on the bookshelf. Arthur, younger, smiling, standing next to a woman. They looked happy, normal. But the background? I squinted at the photo. In the background was a building. The glass facade reflected the street. I knew that building. It was the headquarters of the Meridian Group in the city, a massive financial conglomerate. Arthur Penhaligon. The name sounded old-fashioned. I left the cabin, carefully closing the door. I walked back through the woods, the iron poker heavy in my hand. The woods felt different now. They weren't just empty. They were a stage, and the play had just begun. When I got back to my cabin, I sat at my computer. I hadn't used the internet for anything other than ordering supplies and paying bills in years. My fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard. I searched Arthur Penhaligon. Nothing. Just an obituary for a man who died in 1,954 inches Cornwall. Our Arthur was a ghost. A fake identity. I searched Meridian Group scandal. Hits. Thousands of them. 3 years ago, a massive embezzlement scheme. Millions missing. The chief accountant vanished before he could testify. His name was Paul Arris. I pulled up a photo of Paul Arris. He was heavier, had a beard, wore glasses. I mentally shaved the beard. I stripped the weight. It was Arthur. Arthur was Paul Arris, the man who knew where the bodies were buried, and he had been hiding next to me for 3 years. He didn't slip. They found him. And now, they knew someone was looking. The intruders saw my light earlier, surely. Or maybe they just sensed it. I looked at the small key in my hand. 004. I wasn't a detective anymore. I was a liability. But I couldn't just sit here. Not this time. The sun was starting to bleed gray light into the sky. I made another pot of coffee. I needed to think. I needed a plan. And then I heard the car. A vehicle was coming down my long, gravel driveway. Visitors don't come down my driveway by accident. There was a private property sign at the main road, and another one halfway down that says, "Turn back." The gravel is loose and washes out in the rain. You need four-wheel drive and a reason to be here. I watched through the blinds. It was a black SUV. Clean. Too clean for country living. It crunched to a halt in front of my porch. A woman got out. She looked to be in her mid-30s, sharp features, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a tailored coat that cost more than my truck. She looked at my cabin with an expression of distaste, then composed herself into a mask of grief. She walked up the steps. I opened the door before she could knock. It throws people off balance. "Mr. Thorne?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, practiced. "That's me. I'm Sarah, Arthur's niece." Sarah. The name hit me like a physical blow. The universe has a cruel sense of humor. I kept my face stone. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "Thank you," the sheriff called me. I was his only emergency contact. I came to identify the body." She hesitated, looking past me into the warmth of the cabin. The sheriff said, "You were the one who found him. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions. I want to understand what happened." I stepped back. "Come in." It was a mistake. I knew it was a mistake, but I needed to know who she was. Paul Eris Arthur had no family mentioned in the news reports. He was a loner. She entered, looking around. Her eyes didn't linger on the rustic charm. They scanned the room, analyzing exits, checking for weapons. This wasn't a grieving niece. This was a professional. "Coffee?" I offered. "Please. Black." I poured her a cup. She sat at the kitchen table, keeping her coat on. "You lived next to him for a long time?" she asked. 3 years. Did he seem happy? He seemed quiet. We didn't talk much. She sipped the coffee. She didn't wince at the bitterness. The sheriff said he fell while hiking. That's what the sheriff said. "Do you believe it?" She was testing me. I sat down opposite her. Arthur had bad knees. He didn't hike the ridges. He stuck to the valley floor. He watched birds. "Birds," she repeated. A flicker of something annoyance crossed her face. "Yes, he loved birds. He used to send me photos of them." "Did he?" I leaned back. "What was his favorite?" "Excuse me? His favorite bird? He must have had one." She smiled. A sad, tight little smile. "The eagle, I think. He loved their strength." I nodded slowly. "Interesting. Arthur told me he hated raptors, said they were bullies. He liked the songbirds, warblers, finches." I lied. "Arthur never told me anything." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe. She set the cup down. "Mr. Thorne, did Arthur ever give you anything to keep safe?" He was paranoid toward the end. He thought people were following him. Paranoid? Out here? Dementia runs in the family. He might have given you a package, papers, a drive. Anything? "No," I said. "Like I said, we weren't close." She stared at me. It was a stare that weighed my soul. She was assessing if I was a threat or just a stupid hermit. "I see," she said, standing up. "Well, if you find anything, or if you remember anything, please call me." She handed me a card. *Sarah Jenkins. Consultant. Asterisk. No company name, just a number. I'll do that, I said. She walked to the door. Then she paused. Be careful out here, Mr. Thorne. Accidents happen. It's a dangerous place for a man living alone. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. She drove away. I watched the dust settle. She wasn't a niece. She was a cleaner. She was looking for whatever Paul Eris had stolen from the Meridian Group, the insurance file, the leverage he had kept to stay alive. And she thought I might have it. I pulled the key out of my pocket. 004. It wasn't a bank key. There are no banks nearby. It was too small for a storage unit. It looked like a key for a padlock, a small, weather-resistant padlock. I thought about the bird logs. Asterisk, nesting near the intersection. Asterisk, asterisk, exchange confirmed. Asterisk, Arthur wasn't just watching the road. He was using the woods. There is an old fire watchtower about 2 miles north. It's abandoned, rusted out. The stairs are treacherous, but at the base, there are old equipment lockers. I looked at the sky. Gray clouds were piling up again. Another storm was coming. If I was smart, I would drive to the city and give the key to the FBI. But the FBI hadn't saved Sarah. The system hadn't saved Paul Eris. I grabbed my coat. I grabbed the iron poker again. I didn't have a weapon, but I knew the woods. I set off north, away from the road, moving through the dense undergrowth. I wasn't halfway to the tower when I felt it, the sensation of eyes on my back. I wasn't hunting anymore. I was being hunted. The walk to the fire tower usually takes 40 minutes. I took an hour. I doubled back twice, walking in a loop through a dense thicket of rhododendrons, stopping to listen. Crack. A twig, snapping. Not the wind. The wind is a continuous rush. A footstep is a staccato impact. Someone was behind me, about 50 yards back, trying to match my pace. Sarah, or whatever her name was, hadn't left. She had parked the SUV down the road and followed me. She knew I was lying. She knew I had a lead. I reached the clearing where the fire tower stood. It was a skeleton of rusted steel rising above the canopy. The cabin at the top was gone, blown away years ago, but the concrete base remained. I didn't go to the tower. That was the trap. If I went to the lockers now, she would see me. She would have a clear shot. Instead, I skirted the edge of the clearing and slipped into a ravine that ran parallel to it. I submerged myself in the mud and the decaying leaves. I became part of the ground. This is what I was good at. Sitting, waiting, observing. 10 minutes passed. Then I saw her. She emerged from the trees. She had changed. The coat was gone, replaced by tactical gear. She held a pistol with a suppressor attached. She moved with professional economy, scanning the tower. She checked the base. She checked the old lockers. She found them empty, rusted shut. She kicked one in frustration. She knew I had come this way. She was tracking my boot prints, but my prints stopped at the edge of the clearing. I was 20 feet away, buried in the hollow of a fallen oak tree, watching her through the branches. If I jumped her, I might win. But she had a gun, and I had a fireplace poker. The math wasn't in my favor. I needed her to leave, or I needed to distract her. I picked up a rock. I threw it hard, arching it over the clearing so it landed in the brush on the far side. Asterisk. Thump. Asterisk. She spun around, weapon raised. She moved toward the sound, low and fast. As soon as her back was turned, I moved, not toward her, away, deeper into the woods. I had realized something. The key wasn't for the tower. Asterisk. Nesting near the intersection. Asterisk. Arthur's log. There was another intersection. Not the road. The intersection of the creek and the old property line fence. There was a gate there. A locked gate that hadn't been opened in 50 years. I ran. My lungs burned. I'm 45, not 25. The cigarettes and the whiskey have taken their toll. But fear is a potent fuel. I reached the creek. The water was rising. The storm was breaking now, rain coming down in sheets. I found the gate. It was an old iron thing, swallowed by ivy. A heavy chain held it shut, and hanging from the chain was a padlock. But it wasn't old. It was a new, weatherproof master lock, covered in mud to look old. I fumbled with a key. My hands were shaking. Asterisk. Come on! Come on! Asterisk. It fit. It turned. The lock clicked open. I unwound the chain. Inside the hollow metal post of the gate, there was a plastic tube. A PVC pipe with a screw cap. I pulled it out. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten letter. I didn't read the letter. I heard the snap of a branch. Close. She hadn't fallen for the distraction for long. She was a tracker, too. I was at the creek bottom. Steep banks on both sides. A kill zone. Mr. Thorne! Her voice cut through the rain. I know you're there. Give me the drive. You don't know what you're involved in. I pocketed the tube. I know enough, I shouted back. I know you killed Arthur. Arthur was a thief, she replied, her voice moving closer. He stole from very dangerous people. He was selling client data. He wasn't a hero, Elias. He was a crook. He was unarmed, I said. And you pushed him. I did what was necessary. Now, toss the tube up to the bank, and you can go back to your sad little cabin and drink yourself to death in peace. No one cares about you, Elias. You're already a ghost. She was right. That was the sting of it. She was right. But then I thought of the knee print in the mud. The patience she had shown waiting for Arthur to die. No, I whispered. I looked at the creek. The water was brown and fast. It flowed into a culvert under the logging road about 100 yards downstream. Last chance, Elias. I saw her silhouette at the top of the bank. She had the high ground. I jumped into the water. It was freezing. It knocked the breath out of me. The current grabbed me and slammed me against a rock. I went under. I heard a Times Foot Times sound. The water near my head splashed up. A bullet. I let the current take me. I stayed under as long as I could, scraping my chest against the riverbed stones. I surfaced near the culvert. It was a concrete pipe, 4 feet wide, darkness inside. I scrambled in. The water roared around my waist. I was trapped. If she came to the other end, she would have me. If she waited at the entrance, she would have me. But inside the culvert, the acoustics were strange. The roaring water echoed. I pressed myself against the curved concrete wall. I took out the iron poker. I waited. I heard footsteps on the road above the culvert. She was moving to the other side to cut me off. I didn't go through. I turned around and climbed back out the way I came, fighting the current. It was the hardest physical thing I have ever done. Climbing a waterfall, essentially. I pulled myself up the bank she had just vacated. She was standing on the bridge above the other end of the culvert, gun trained on the exit, waiting for me to flush out. I was behind her now. I stood up. I was dripping wet, shivering, exhausted. "Hey!" I shouted. She spun around. She raised the gun, but the mud on the bank was slick. The same mud that killed Arthur. She turned too fast. Her boot slipped on the wet clay. She didn't fall off the bridge. She caught the railing with her free hand. The gun skittered across the wet asphalt. I lunged. I didn't hit her. I kicked the gun away. It spun off the bridge and fell into the rushing water below. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide. She was still holding the railing, half hanging over the drop. "Help me," she gasped. I looked at her. I looked at her hand gripping the rusted metal. I saw Sarah's face. The 12-year-old girl. If I let her fall, I was a murderer. If I saved her, she might kill me. But I am not her. I reached out and grabbed her wrist. I hauled her up. It took everything I had. We collapsed on the asphalt, panting in the rain. She looked at me, bewildered. She rubbed her wrist. She had a backup knife in her boot. I knew she did. I saw her hand twitch toward it. "Don't," I said. I held up the poker. "Just don't." She froze. "Go," I said. She stared at me. "You have the drive. They won't stop. Let them come," I said. "I'm awake now." She stood up slowly. She looked at me with something like respect, or maybe just confusion. Then she turned and ran into the woods, back toward her car. I sat there in the rain until I heard the engine start and fade away. The drive contained everything. Ledgers, emails, recordings. Arthur Paul had documented a decade of money laundering by the Meridian Group. It was enough to bury them. I didn't give it to the local police. I didn't trust Miller. I drove 3 hours to the state capitol. I walked into the FBI field office. I placed the tube on the desk of the assistant director. I didn't give my name, but they knew who I was. My fingerprints are in the system. I didn't stay for the accolades. There wouldn't be any. I was a trespasser who tampered with a crime scene. I drove back to the cabin. The next day, the news broke. Arrests were made. The niece was identified as Elena Volk, a private contractor for corporate espionage. She was picked up at the airport, trying to leave the country. I sat on my porch. The sun was out. The storm had stripped the last of the leaves from the trees. The woods were bare and open. I looked toward Arthur's cabin. It was empty. It would be sold eventually. Someone else would move in. Maybe a family. Maybe another loner. I drank my coffee. The silence was back. But it was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of guilt. It was just quiet. I thought about Sarah, the little girl. I couldn't bring her back. Saving Elena Volk didn't balance the scales. The ledger didn't balance. It never does. But I had stepped out of the cabin. I had engaged with the world. And I had survived. I put the coffee cup down. I picked up my binoculars. A hawk was circling the north ridge. A red-tailed hawk. "Bully," I muttered, but I watched it fly. I watched it until it disappeared over the mountain. Then I went inside and, for the first time in 3 years, I unlocked the safe where I kept my gun. I took it out. I cleaned it. I didn't load it. I just cleaned it. I put it back. Then I picked up the phone and dialed my sister. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. "Hello?" Her voice was tentative. "It's Elias," I said. "Elias? Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Everything is okay. I wanted to hear a voice that wasn't mine." "It's good to hear you, Elias. It's good to be heard," I said. I looked out the window one last time. The woods were still there. The darkness was still there. But I wasn't drowning in it anymore. I was just living in it. And that, I realized, was enough.